A lot of people today are interested in Celtic spirituality, in the Celtic Church, in Celtic Monasticism, and this short video is an introduction to the nature of Celtic Monasticism. I want to look at the way that Celtic monasteries functioned, and to do this I'm going to summarise some of the points that are made by Ian Bradley in his excellent book Colonies of Heaven. If these sorts of topics are of great interest to you, I would recommend visiting my Facebook page, Finian Press, and I'll leave a link below. So from the 5th to the 11th centuries, it was the monasteries that were the predominant form that Christianity took in the UK and in Ireland. After the Norman conquest, the system of monasteries was in existence, but it was really replaced more by the system of bishops and dioceses that we are perhaps a bit more familiar with today. So I'm going to make 8 points, and I will illustrate the points as we go along so that you can track where we're at on this journey into Celtic monasticism. So the first point is that the monasteries offered a model of ministry that was communal rather than the more individualistic ministry that we often see today. So there were teams of men and women who would go forth from the monastery for pastoral care, for church planting, for evangelism, and would keep the monastery itself running in terms of continual prayer and praise. The second thing that we should note is that the monasteries existed in a great variety of forms and for a variety of reasons. So it may be that there were 2 hermit huts together, and that was a sort of small monastery, or it may be that there was what was essentially a small village of 1,000 or more people who lived together. There might be men and women, there might be some who were celibate, there might be some who were married. There was also a variety in the function that these places performed. So it may be more of a place for prayer or spiritual direction, or it may be a base for evangelism or for art and creativity. So what we see is a whole variety of functions, and I think this is important for church today because we sometimes produce a one-size-fits-all model, whereas I think the monasteries show us that there were other options and many different forms which our life together can take. The third point to note is that these were intentional communities. These were places of discipline and commitment. Today, a lot is made of a sort of family feel, and monasteries can be seen as sort of a bit freewheeling and anything goes, but actually the opposite was the truth. They lived under what they called a rule of life, which regulated their times of prayer, what they did with their spare time, how much they ate, how much they drank, and this gave shape to their life together. They did this because they saw themselves as engaged in a battle with the devil, and just like armed forces need to be well prepared, well trained, well disciplined, they saw that this was necessary for them as well. And these practices formed them spiritually, it formed their character, it formed their spiritual life, and it gave rise to people who often could undertake great things for God. The fourth thing to note is that although the monasteries in the Celtic regions were influenced heavily by the monasteries and the solitary monks of Egypt, Actually, their life together often took a slightly different form. In Egypt, people were withdrawing from society in order to seek God. Although that happened in the Celtic regions, what we see most often is an intense engagement with society. I've got a bit of a list of the functions that they performed. So they might be a bit like a hotel. Perhaps they were the forerunners of Holiday Inn, except that at the end of your stay, you didn't have a bill to pay. They might fulfill the role of a hospital. The hospitium was where guests were housed, and eventually some of these places became a site of care for the sick. They might be a school or university. Some monasteries specialised in education. And then, of course, there's the arts. There's the great artistry that we see in the Lindisfarne Gospels and the Book of Kells. They might be more like an open prison or a reformatory where people went when they had done wrong to change their ways. It was a retreat centre, a church, a mission station, a prayer room, and a place for spiritual healing. Some monasteries would emphasise one of these functions or more, and others would emphasise others. So this contributed to the variety. Non-violence was very important to the monasteries. They saw themselves as a foretaste of paradise. They saw themselves as an outpost of the kingdom of God, and as such, violence was not allowed within the monastery. The fifth thing is that hospitality was a major feature. It's said that at David's monastery in Wales that they were very generous to visitors and would often give them sumptuous meals while the monks themselves ate bread. This is because they saw visitors as Christ himself, or that they were entertaining angels unaware. The next point is that monasteries were often places of pastoral presence, so they emphasized prayer, study, healing, and whereas some Celtic saints were evangelists, many probably wouldn't have seen themselves in that light, although the fact that they were there, the fact that they were engaged with society, actually gave rise to evangelism. So this ministry of pastoral presence is another thing that I think we can consider today as being perhaps important for us and our churches. So the final point is that monasteries were places of frequent prayer, praise and petition. They would often do this through chanting the Psalms. Few people would have an individual copy, so they memorized the Psalms and would repeat them and would pray them and use them as the basis for their relating to God. Because the Psalms are experiential rather than primarily being theological, they allow us, they help us to give voice to whatever is going on in our lives today. The other thing is that they often had periods of intense engagement in the life of the monastery or the society around them, combined with periods of disengagement. So Cuthbert, for example, would often retreat from his base on Lindisfarne to a smaller island where he would spend time growing crops and seeking God. So there was this balance between a more outward focus and times of retreat. And again, I think that's a model for our lives today that we might consider. So I hope that this has been of interest to you. I've made 8 points drawn from Ian Bradley's book. And as mentioned, if you like this sort of thing, please do visit my Facebook page, Finian Press.